Elizabeth I Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the invincible monarch who defeated the Spanish Armada and ruled over a golden age. She crafted an image of divine, untouchable power, a queen who would never age, never weaken, and never die. That image was a lie, one of the most elaborate and successful lies in history, because behind the mask of immortality, the real Elizabeth was literally rotting. You're about to discover the horrifying secret that her court desperately tried to hide, a queen so consumed by vanity and paranoia that she allowed her own body to decay while she was still alive. A ruler whose final days were a grotesque spectacle of madness, filth, and terror, and whose corpse held one final, disgusting secret that would prove she was never a god, just a woman. Let's start with that iconic white face. It wasn't a symbol of purity. It was a toxic mask hiding a nightmare. Elizabeth was obsessed with her image, and after a bout of smallpox left her scarred, she turned to a deadly cosmetic called Venetian ceruse. This wasn't makeup, it was poison, a thick paste made of white lead and vinegar. Every day, she would slather this toxic concoction onto her face, creating a smooth, white veneer. But here's where it gets truly grotesque. The lead would slowly eat away at her skin underneath, creating more scars, gray discoloration, and lesions. So what did she do? She just applied thicker layers of the poison to hide the damage the poison was causing. But the horror was more than skin deep. She had a legendary sweet tooth, and by her 40s, most of her teeth had rotted black and fallen out. Diplomats wrote in secret letters about the foul smell that emanated from her mouth when she spoke. To solve this, she would stuff rags of cloth into the gaps in her gums to plump up her cheeks for portraits. The most powerful woman in the world was walking around with rotten teeth, poisoned skin, and a mouth full of rags, all hidden beneath a mask of white lead. You don't learn this in the storybooks, but for all her glamorous gowns, Elizabeth I was pathologically terrified of bathing. She reportedly bathed only once a month, believing that washing was unhealthy. Imagine the reality of that. A woman in her 60s, wearing heavy, unbreathable layers of corsets and gowns, rarely washing, all while covered in oozing, lead-induced skin lesions. The stench in her private chambers was said to be so overwhelming that courtiers would douse themselves in perfume just to stand in her presence. But it gets worse. As she aged, she developed an extreme paranoia of doctors. She was convinced that any physician who tried to treat her was secretly an assassin sent by her enemies. She refused almost all medical examinations. Sores festered, infections went untreated, and her body began to fail. She was the ruler of a nation, but she was trapped in a decaying, unwashed body that she refused to let anyone help. She chose to rot rather than show a moment of weakness. The decay wasn't just physical. In her final years, Elizabeth's famously sharp mind began to crack, turning her from a brilliant ruler into a terrifying tyrant. Her paranoia reached fever pitch. She had mirrors in her private rooms covered, terrified of seeing her own decaying reflection. She would spend hours in complete silence, refusing to speak to anyone, her eyes wide with what courtiers described as a settled and unmovable melancholy. These silent spells were punctuated by terrifying fits of rage. She would scream at her servants, throw objects, and was even known to strike her ladies-in-waiting. Here's the truly disturbing part. The court had to pretend this was all normal. They lived in constant fear, watching their immortal queen descend into madness, knowing that one wrong word could get them sent to the Tower of London. The woman who had held the kingdom together with her intellect was now a prisoner of her own shattered mind. Elizabeth's final days are the stuff of nightmares. Convinced that if she lay down in bed she would never get up again, she made a terrifying decision. She would not sleep. Not in a bed. Anyway, for nearly 2 weeks, the Queen of England stood, right there, in the middle of her chambers, propped up by cushions, refusing to move, eat, or lie down. Her ladies-in-waiting begged her to rest, but she refused, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her legs and feet swelled to grotesque proportions. Her body began to shut down, but still, she stood. Imagine the horror of the royal court, forced to watch their queen essentially commit suicide on her feet. This wasn't a noble death. It was a slow, agonizing, and bizarre spectacle. She finally collapsed from sheer exhaustion and was placed on a mattress on the floor, where she died a few days later, having ruled from a standing position until her body physically gave out. You'd think the horror would end with her death. You'd be wrong. Here's the detail they definitely left out of your history textbook. Elizabeth's body was embalmed and placed in a lead-lined coffin for the funeral procession. But the embalmers, perhaps working in haste, did a poor job. As her body lay in state for weeks, the natural process of decomposition began to accelerate inside the sealed coffin. Putrid gases from her decaying organs started to build up pressure. During the funeral procession, as hundreds of mourners lined the streets, a sound like a cannon shot cracked through the solemn silence. The coffin had literally exploded. The pressure from the rotting queen's remains had become so great that it burst the lead lining. The stench of royal decay filled the air. The perfect, immortal image that Elizabeth had spent her entire life building had been shattered in one final, disgusting, and very human moment. The Virgin Queen, Gloriana, had ended not as a goddess, but as an exploding corpse. So there you have it. The most powerful woman of her age, a master of propaganda who built a legend of untouchable divinity, was, in the end, a prisoner of her own body. Her legacy isn't just a golden age. It's a terrifying masterclass in how the obsession with power can lead to a slow, vile decay from the inside out. If these horrifying royal secrets have you questioning the history you were taught, hit that subscribe button, because there are so many more bodies buried under the throne.